Hi, my name is Zach and I have obsessive compulsive disorder, or better known as OCD. I also have a deep love and passion for tabletop role-playing games, two things that have made a giant impact on my life, but couldn't be more different. One, this debilitating mental illness that wants to eliminate randomness and chance from my life, creating sets of irrational rules for me that try to make my life as small as possible, while tabletop games also use rules, but rules to create wonderful narratives. These books ask us to take a chance on, well, chance and randomness. And like I said, they couldn't be more different, but during my darkest hours with my mental health, these right here helped me through it. So I wanted to make a video because it is Mental Health Awareness Month. I want to kind of help try to break that stigma of mental health, and I wanted to just talk about my journey with OCD and my journey with tabletop games because they are very, very much interlinked, and I usually script my videos way more precisely before I record them, but I felt like I wanted to kind of just, come out and just talk about some of the things that I have felt and some of the experiences I've had. And even right now, my OCD is that's an awful idea. You're gonna say something you're gonna regret, but here we are. So let's start this video with actually defining what is OCD. Now, I could throw up on the screen the actual description of what obsessive compulsive disorder is, but I have found through therapy and talking with other people and just living my own experiences that it is a very wide net. It can mean a bunch of different things, but instead, let me give you an example of what my OCD feels like. So for example, have you ever had that feeling that when you left your house, your apartment, that you left the stove on? That dreadful, anxious feeling. You maybe get it while you're down the road from your house and you're like, oh man, did I leave the stove on? Maybe I should go check, or you know what? No, I didn't. I totally didn't. And then you just keep going to the grocery store, or you go back and you notice that the stovetop wasn't on and you're totally fine, and then you just go about your day. Well, with OCD, this is how that same example would go. So you leave your house, you're down the street, you get the thought that maybe you left the stove on. It is a very distressing thought, so you rush back to your house to check to see if your stove is off. You go inside, the stove is off, but you don't get relief. You walk back to your car, you sit down, and you're like, oh wait, did I just imagine going inside and checking on my stove? I don't have concrete proof that I went inside. I mean, you kind of do, but your brain is telling you that you don't have concrete proof that you went inside and checked on the stove. So why don't you just go back inside and check on the stove? Couldn't hurt anything, right? You want to make sure that this very freak accident couldn't happen to you, that you're not going to burn down your house. So you go back inside to your house, you see that the stove top is off, and then you walk back to your car, and then you get the thought of, did I just turn the light on in the kitchen, the light that I've been avoiding using because it flickered a couple nights ago? And I'm pretty convinced that if I leave that light on, there has to be some type of electrical wiring problem in my house. So I really need to make sure that I didn't turn that light on, because I'm purposely avoiding using that light. That light I can't use, so I need to go back inside. Also, I should probably check on the stove, because maybe I just imagined that I went inside and checked on the stove. Actually, this time I'm going to pull out my phone and I'm going to record myself checking on the stove and the light, just to make sure that I didn't, leave those on. You go inside, the light switch is off, the stove is off, you record everything, you get back in your car, you look at the recording, and then your brain's like, well, what if you recorded that, you watched it, and then you don't remember that you went inside and turned all that stuff on? Also, what if you wanted your house to burn down? You keep having these thoughts about your house burning down. What if that's what you wanted? And then this just keeps repeating and repeating and escalating until you never actually leave your house, because you have to be there to make sure that the light switch wasn't turned on, that the stove top wasn't turned on, that you didn't do anything else wrong, and also what's wrong with your brain? Why are you forgetting things now? What does that mean? It's so much safer to stay inside, because you don't know. life could happen. What if all these random things, what if a mouse chewed through your stovetop when you were gone, and now that's gonna, and that's what OCD is like. But take that example and put it onto every aspect of life. Cooking was a nightmare. You know, you think that you dropped your food, or that there's some chemicals on it, or that it was going to get you severely sick. Every time your body does something that you think is not normal, you imagine you are going to die because your thoughts don't stop escalating, and you try to do these compulsive things to make them stop. Like I said previously, OCD is a disorder, in my experience, that wants to shrink your life as small as possible, because when you are as small as possible, then it's less things you have to irrationally worry about. And the paradox of that is, at least in my experience, is OCD never lets up. You can set 1,000 rules, and at my worst, I was setting like 1,000 rules to get through my day, and it will never be enough for your brain. You will always want to set more rules until you slowly eliminate doing anything that you've wanted to do ever. You just eliminate happiness, joy, sadness, and you're just stuck with rules. You are stuck with this ever-present rule system that you feel like you must follow, because if you do not follow those rules, then something very bad is going to happen. With that all being said, I want to talk about how tabletop games came into my life around the same time my OCD was beginning to appear and escalate. As a kid, I was always pretty anxious. I also was pretty sick, not in like the cool 90s sick way. I mean, I could tear it up on a Razor scooter, but by the age of 11, I had a handful of major surgeries and another handful of pretty long hospital stays for things such as pneumonia and blood infections. I have an immune disorder that caused a lot of that stuff. But other than that, I had a pretty normal childhood. You know, I was playing Donkey Kong N64 in my hospital stays. I was hanging out, playing sports, all this fun stuff. But it was really when I got to college that my mental health began to take a downturn, and I started setting these more OCD like rules in my life, but at that time I didn't know that's what I was doing. It was also around that time when I started college that I played my first TTRPG, that game being Pathfinder 1st edition, and my first character I ever made was an Orc Oracle, which, if you know anything about Pathfinder 1st edition, it is kind of wild that my first ever tabletop character was an Oracle, because that is if I'm remembering correctly, a pretty complex class, and Pathfinder 1st edition is a pretty dense book that I love very much. It is around that time that I fell in love with the mechanics and the ideas of tabletop games, and Pathfinder really set the tone for me liking crunchier games. And yeah, so college started, mental health, starting to take a little bit of a dive. Started playing Pathfinder 1st edition with some coworkers that turned friends. We played a couple sessions on and off. We checked out some other things. But it wouldn't be till a couple years later that another set of friends wanted to check out Dungeons and Dragons. This was around the time where D&D 5e was kind of popping up, and I offered to run that game because I had experience with tabletop games before, and also, I've always wanted to try to run a tabletop game. So that became a weekly occurrence that is, still going on somewhat today, which is it's almost like 10 years now, and it became this staple in my life where every single week I would run D&D, and then, eventually we would splinter off into other tabletop games. But it became this routine for me while I was struggling in other aspects of my life. You see, it took me a decently long time to graduate college, because I kept having these flare-ups in which it was really hard for me to leave my house. It was really hard for me to not isolate, because at that time I thought I just had really bad anxiety, but I was beginning to really set these irrational rules because my OCD was beginning to appear, and things just kept getting worse and worse. I saw therapists, I got help, I was working at the time, but they just thought I had anxiety. That's what it was. That all escalated in my last year of college. I eventually made it back to the school I was going to. I finished all my classes to an art school specifically for film. And during that year, I ended up at the emergency room 8 different times. 8 different times that I had convinced myself that I was going to die. And that is when I was diagnosed with panic disorder. Those were 8 panic attacks caused by me believing that my health was getting so bad that I was about to die. 8 different car rides that I remember thinking that would be my last moments. And that is really when my OCD started to get really bad. But at the same time, I was still running a weekly D&D game. It was almost like magic. The rest of my life was falling apart. Things were getting really bad, but for some reason or another, I was able to still run and play and read tabletop games. It was also around that time, that year in which I ended up in the air a lot, that I also started to expand my collection because I loved learning about tabletop games. Now, a big part of why I was able to keep up that weekly schedule is because of the love and support of my friends, which that's a big piece of this puzzle, is that their support and their understanding, despite the fact that I did let them know I was having mental health issues, but not maybe to the extent I was having them. They were always understanding if I had to, miss a session or two. But also, at my worst time, I fell back to tabletop games because I could escape in them. And it also is for another reason that I want to talk to you about at the end of this video, but I can allure to that now, is tabletop games also were exposing me to the randomness and chance that I was trying to avoid with my OCD. The rest of my life, I was imprisoned by these rules because I was trying to eliminate that chaos of life, that randomness of life in tabletop games. Ironically enough, the reason I play them is because I love the randomness and the chance of them. And, over time, it kind of exposed me to being okay with randomness. And I'll talk about that more at the end of this video. I graduated. Awesome, right? 2019, December, I graduated, and then COVID hit. And if you really want a mental disorder to thrive, you just add some isolation and a global pandemic, especially if your OCD is worried about health issues. I became very agoraphobic. This studio you see around me, I spent probably like 75% of my time in for 3.5 years after. I had set so many irrational rules. And not just like the rules that we all had during COVID to keep each other safe, but I had taken it to the next level. I was barely eating because I was afraid of all the different things that could go wrong while cooking. I wasn't talking to people other than my tabletop game. I was isolating away. I most nights I barely slept because I couldn't stop thinking about all the things that were going to go wrong. But tabletop games were there. I still played them weekly. I even added more tabletop games into my schedule to run them. Because for some reason, even during my worst times, even during the times in which I was barely sleeping, in which I stayed locked away in this room, I just could play and run and read tabletop games. And for some reason, my OCD never grabbed onto them. So now with that all being said, let's talk about how tabletop games actually helped me through these dark times, now that we've laid out that entire picture. I've alluded to it before, but having a weekly game that I could, do routinely helped me build up my confidence. OCD is a confidence killer because you doubt everything about the world around you and you doubt everything that your mind is telling you. and being able to play tabletop games and just have a great time, either solo or with your friends, and just telling a narrative using mechanics. It's a great way to build up confidence. Confidence, like I said, that OCD takes away from you. I also want to add in, and I've said it in this video already, the love and support that I got from the people I was running the games for. My friends, my best friends, also really helped me in this time, and routinely being able to see them and have that support also was very therapeutic. Tabletop games also gave me an outlet to still enjoy myself. During my agoraphobic phase, I also started making videos, short videos. You may have seen them before. I'm talking about different monsters, specifically Pathfinder 2nd Edition monsters for a while. And it gave me purpose. It gave me a reason to read, which is something that I very much love. I love learning about new systems and then being able to talk about them. That also gave me confidence. But the thing that really helped me, and the thing that I really think tabletop games can help with OCD, is it made me excited for randomness and the unknown. Like I've talked about many times in this video, OCD is, at least in my experience, the attempt to eliminate the unknown, to eliminate the randomness of life. And tabletop games make you love the randomness and the unknown of life. When I go to play a game, I don't know where it's going. I might have an idea of where it's starting, but I have no idea where it's going. Take, for example, a Perfect Rock. I just did a playthrough on my channel. It started very heavy sci-fi, but it ended very magical. Tabletop games, like I said, slowly made me appreciate randomness. And there's actually a term for what they were doing. You see, one of the most effective therapies for OCD is exposure therapy. Exposure therapy, in incredibly simple terms, is, if we go back to our example before about the stove being on, is gripping that steering wheel and just driving away from your house even though you think you left the stove on. It is exposing yourself to the randomness of the world and fighting back against those rules that you've set for yourself. It is the idea that, you know, you can't control everything and you are going to just push through it. And that's what tabletop games were doing for me when I didn't even realize that. They were exposing me to worlds out there that were filled with randomness and the unknown, and over time, just by being able to embrace that and finding love for that randomness, finding love for stories that you don't know the ending for, that you don't know where they're going to go, and really embracing that fact of tabletop games really helped me with my own life, with my own reality. Because in tabletop games, if I could play a knight who would go through the dark forests to save the castle and a bunch of random things happen to them, I could find a way to leave my house and go to the grocery store. And yeah, I think I'm gonna end the video here. I feel like I probably could talk about this for a much longer time, and I hope I was coherent. This has been a pretty hard video to make, mostly because it's hard to admit that I have OCD. For the longest time, I didn't want to admit it because it felt scary. It felt scary to have this thing that has been presented in media for so long as this incredibly debilitating mental illness. But it's very treatable from what I found out, but it's also still a little scary to say out loud. So, you know, I have OCD. Along with that, my OCD is kicking in right now, thinking about all the different ways I could have said something wrong or offended someone, or just, you know, I'm doing something wrong. And I think that's why it's important to make it and release it, even though this video is not going to be the most perfect video I've ever made. It's not going to be up to my standards, my very high standards for the videos I make, to a fault. And I think it's important to make this video because you never know who else is suffering through things. Like I said, I ran some pretty long tabletop campaigns, and my friends didn't know I was having mental health issues, but I never really got into the details of everything that was going on. And maybe there is someone who is also struggling out there who can see this video and watch it and not only find tabletop games that can help them, but also realize that things can and do get better. I, at one point, wasn't leaving this studio. I was barely eating, like I said. I literally thought that was going to be the rest of my life. I thought my life was over. I thought this mental illness I had won. And I'm sitting here now, the happiest I've ever been. Joy has returned to my life. I can do things I never thought I would be able to do. I go to the grocery store like every other day just to be there, just to pick up small things, just to be like, I can do that. I can leave this house. And if I can show that to someone else who is struggling, that it can get better for you, then it's worth it. It's worth being terrified and talking about my experiences. And yeah, I think I want to end it there. I don't know how long this video's been at this point, and I like I said, I can go on forever, but I just want to leave you with one last thing, a thing that I say at the end of every single video I make, and that is be excellent to each other, because like I said, you don't know who is going through what. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. I know a lot of other very courageous and wonderful people are sharing their experiences. And I also want to add onto that be excellent to each other is be kind to yourself, because the world can be very unkind. You deserve that kindness. All right, bye everyone.